So currently I am the new executive director at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, which is a national youth-focused organization that addresses discrimination through educational programming in schools across Canada.
Cool. So what does a day-to-day kind of aspect of your job look like? Obviously in COVID, it's probably a bit different than it normally would be.
Yes. So day to day usually starts with me opening my email to a lot of email requests. Being the executive director, you get a lot either from staff or from partners or from volunteers kind of just asking questions. I think in the COVID context, there's a lot of meetings and Zoom calls just to kind of touch base with staff. But a lot of it, I would say, is a lot of to-do lists, a lot of reading emails, and a lot of checking off my to-do lists as well.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you get to tick things off as well, kind of thing.
I try.
And is this your first job since you kind of finished studies, or have you had other ones in between finishing up at NIPSIA and now?
Yeah, so I had two before this one. So between graduation, so officially finished in 2018, December. That's when I submitted my final major paper. But there was an overlap with me working at Global Affairs Canada while a student, and then also while I was done. And then from there, I worked at Oxfam Canada, and then to the CCGSD, where I currently am. I started in women and gender studies. I was a feminist teenager who knew what she wanted to do. And so I applied, I started in there, and then I always knew that my hopeful career trajectory was going to take me into international development or policy of some sorts, looking at, of course, gender equality. But the international development perspective was one that was something I was really passionate about. And so I used the opportunity of the major and the double minor to kind of create what I felt was my academic journey to kind of get me where I wanted to be. And funnily enough, when I finished at NIPSIA, I was working in the Gender Equality Bureau at Global Affairs Canada, really addressing gender equality advocacy issues in sub-Saharan Africa. So it essentially touched on every single thing that I've worked on. And yeah, that's kind of what brought me there.
Can you talk a bit about your most memorable experiences as a student at Carleton?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with this question, you want to say it's the academic side, but I would say that that's probably in the top three, but definitely number one and two would have been my extracurricular activities and my student activism. I was also a student athlete, so I played rugby at Carleton. And what I really, really enjoyed was having a rugby coach who was super focused on academia and wanting us to not only perform well in school, but he also really wanted us to perform well in activism. And so being able to not only be a student athlete and fortunately enough, win an award for being a good student as well as a good athlete. It was an academic All-Canadian. I was able to kind of build community through my extracurriculars. And I think that made me a better student because I had to obviously tie my interest into my school schedule and as well, the goals that I wanted to accomplish after. And I think the biggest thing that I learned from it that I take with me to my current, not only my current work, but also my community activism is that it gave me the opportunity, or it taught me how to speak truth to power. And I always talk about the university space being almost like a micro version of real world society where you do have to advocate for yourself and there are entities that you have to lobby. And it was through that opportunity to practice those skills in my graduate studies, but also in my undergrad that I've taken with me now, doing advocacy work outside of the government now that I'm working at a nonprofit.
So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to study women and gender studies, even a course or just the sort of kind of the ethos of what's going on in the department?
Absolutely. So to describe the women and gender studies department, I think if I was going to explain it to someone who's coming right out of high school, I would explain it as a course where you learn everything you didn't in high school. Oftentimes, our history courses don't touch on the accomplishments and achievements of women and gender diverse people. Sociology courses, if they're available at your high school or an elective, we unfortunately don't have a comprehensive sex education where you'll be able to learn about queer and other gender diverse people. And a women in gender studies course not only allows you to understand all that subject matter that you would have missed in high school, but allows you to have really beautiful conversations and healthy debate that also is absent in secondary education. And the thing that I noticed with women's studies is that my cohort started in my first year in 2010. There was about 5 of us who were majoring, and by the end of the 4 years, there were well over 100 people who were majoring in women's studies. It's one of those things where people go to see what it's about, they are passionate or have that activist spirit, or of course they believe in women's rights and gender equity, but they didn't want to major in it. But usually after their first course with phenomenal professor, and I've had many phenomenal professors in women's studies, some of whom I consider friends today, it changes your whole perspective, and it changes your understanding of what women's studies can actually do in terms of a career trajectory or even an academic trajectory if you continue to a PhD. It's a very, very, very fascinating program. It's beautiful, and it has allowed me to kind of bring that activist spirit I always had into the classroom, which is what I think I missed in high school for sure. My undergrad actually took me 6 years to complete, and I attribute it not only to having been a varsity athlete, but then also doing extracurriculars, but also wanting to set up a pace that I felt was comfortable enough for me to really take care of my mental health. And I think if there's any advice I'd give to an undergrad is not to feel any shame with how long it takes for you to complete. Don't feel the pressure of you have to do everything possible to be done in those 4 years. Honestly, set up your own pace for success and don't feel any shame at all. Because at the end of the day, you'll get that degree, it'll be done, you're gonna make that accomplishment. It just doesn't have to be in either the 4 years that they tell you, whomever they are tells you, and sometimes it doesn't have to be the same time that your peers or your friends actually graduate too. So my advice would be just set up yourself with the most appropriate pace for you to finish, and not to feel any shame if it takes you longer than expected.
So last question, why Carleton? So, I mean, you've had experience at the undergrad and the grad level in a number of different programs. So why should a student choose Carleton?
Absolutely. If you asked me that question when I was in grade 12 and selected Carleton, I would have had a completely different response than I do now at almost 29 years old. And I think looking back at it, choosing Carleton would be great for anyone, because there's just something about the school environment where it's almost like its own little community within the city of Ottawa. It's so much easier to build connections, not only with your peers, but with your professors. You definitely can build long-lasting relationships both in and outside of the classroom that you can carry on with you for the rest of your life. Like I mentioned before, there are professors who I still am in contact with today who not only were my biggest advocates when I was an academic, but are still my biggest cheerleaders even now as someone who's in a career. And that for me is so rewarding, because you're often taught that professors are just this entity that marks your papers and that's it. But it's different at Carleton. I think there's just something about the environment that allows you to build these long-lasting relationships. And those cheerleaders, I think, are so needed, not only for your own individual success, but I would say for someone who's coming from a diverse background, the first person to have gone to university in my immediate family, having those cheerleaders and having those people who are in positions of power to encourage you is so beautiful. And there's just something about Carleton that enables that energy. And I would definitely say if that's something that you want, you need, Carleton would be perfect for that.